Yemen's Houthi militia has vowed to continue its attacks on Red Sea vessels after the United States and Britain launched another series of airstrikes against them. Washington and London put out a joint statement saying they hit dozens of targets inside Yemen, which included underground weapons depots, missile systems and launchers, as well as radars. The strike is part of the joint U.S. and U.K. military effort to deter the Houthis from further disrupting global shipping lanes in the Red Sea. And the United States says it will continue with retaliatory strikes. Here's White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
It began with the strikes on Friday night, but that is not the end of it. We intend to take additional strikes and additional action to continue to send a clear message that the United States will respond when our forces are attacked or our people are killed. At this point, we are still assessing the question of how many casualties there were among the militia groups, and our military will continue to provide the president with those assessments.
And for a closer look, we can now bring in Fawaz Gerges. He's a professor of international relations at the London School of Economics. Good to have you on the show. Now, as we just heard, the U.S. intends to take additional strikes after hitting targets in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. What do you think we can expect next?
I'm afraid more of the same. My take is that the Iraqi and Syrian militias will most likely retaliate against U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria in the next few days or week. And also, it seems to me that American and British attacks against the Houthis in Yemen had failed to deter the Houthis from hitting and targeting commercial shipping. So what we're really seeing in Iraq, in Syria, on the Lebanese-Israeli front, and in Yemen is basically a low-intensity warfare between Israel and the United States and the UK and some European countries and Hamas and Iran and its allies, network of allies in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria and Yemen.
Now, Sullivan did not rule out the possibility of attacks inside Iran, the biggest backer of the Houthis. Do you see that happening anytime soon?
I doubt it very much for two reasons. President Biden has made it very clear he does not really want a wider war. And the Iranians also do not really want a wider war with either the United States and Israel. What we're really seeing is a war by proxy. So Iran is using its allies in Iraq, in Syria and Yemen to increase the pressure, to increase the cost on the United States for its preponderant support for Israel. And the United States is trying to basically retaliate against Iran's allies. What's happening here is that President Biden has to really walk a fine line between retaliation and escalation. Remember, there are elections, presidential elections in the United States in the next few months. So the president does not really want to get embroiled in the shifting sands in the Middle East before because he's seeking a second presidential term.
Yeah. Iran says the U.S. has made a strategic mistake. Many consider the ball to be in Tehran's court now. How do you expect Iran to respond?
The Iranians said, and their allies, the ball is in the United States court. What we're talking about is I don't expect the Iraqi militias and the Syrian militias and the Hezbollah and the Houthis to stop their attacks as long as the war continues in Gaza. And this is why what you're seeing now is really the Middle East is a very volatile, unstable. It's a tinderbox. It really takes a spark to ignite a wider fire. So without ending the bloodshed in Gaza, my take is that both sides will continue to test each other's will. The danger lies is that miscalculation could happen, and basically a trigger could really basically bring about a war, a direct war between the United States and Iran, even though neither side want a direct war between each other.
Exactly. All sides involved insist that that is not what they want. That was Fawaz Gerges from the London School of Economics. Thank you so much for your analysis. Now, these latest strikes are the third time that British and American forces have jointly targeted Yemen's Houthi rebels, whose attacks, which they say are in solidarity with Palestinians in war-battered Gaza, have disrupted global trade. Now, let's take a closer look at the group and their motivations.
Hundreds of Houthi supporters on Sunday organized a military parade in solidarity with Gaza and in protest against the American and British airstrikes on Houthi sites. They vow to continue fighting as long as there is war in Gaza.
Yemen's tribes are ready, old and young, with men and weapons to confront America, Britain and Israel in solidarity with their families and brothers in Gaza. Yemeni tribes are defending human rights and people who are weak.
Houthi militants have used drones and anti-ship missiles to attack vessels in the Red Sea. And in one case, used a helicopter to seize a cargo vessel with ties to Israel. The Houthis are part of the so-called Axis of Resistance. This is an alliance of groups in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and Iraq, which are supported by Iran and oppose Israel and the U.S. Iran has been accused of arming, training, and funding the Houthis, but the rebel group denies it's an Iranian proxy. The Houthis control much of the north of Yemen, including the capital, Sana'a. They've been fighting a civil war in Yemen for almost a decade against the internationally recognized government backed by Saudi Arabia. Despite the latest strikes by British and American militaries, Houthi rebel officials say their attacks in the Red Sea will continue.
Let's bring in Gerald Firestein, a former U.S. ambassador to Yemen. He's currently with the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. and joins us from Philadelphia. It's good to have you with us here on DW News. So how significant are these retaliatory strikes against the Houthis, and what impact do you think this will actually have on their operations in the Red Sea?
It's a pleasure to be with you again tonight. Certainly the U.S. and the U.K. know what they're striking at. I suspect there will be a battle damage assessment made. I would assume that we have hit the targets that we were aiming at. The issue is twofold. One, of course, is how much damage is that actually doing to their operations, to their facilities, to their equipment. And secondly, how difficult is it going to be for the Houthis to replace it? Because one of the things that I think people need to keep in mind is that as long as the Iranian resupply continues, most of this material is going to be fairly easily replaced. And I don't think it's going to affect Houthi operations substantially. It's certainly not going to eliminate their capacity to continue launching these strikes against shipping.
Right. Now, Jake Sullivan did not rule out the possibility of attacks inside Iran as well. Do you see that happening?
I think that would be a huge decision for the president to make because there's no question that Iran has the capacity to retaliate significantly against the U.S., against U.S. partners and allies. It's got formidable capacity on missiles, drones, other kinds of weapon systems. It's got a fairly modern air defense system so that U.S. attacks would not be without risk. I don't see that this is a decision the president is going to make unless something much more severe happens that challenges U.S. interests in the region.
And what do you think the United States is expected to do next going forward?
Well, I think, the president has said and his advisors have said that they're going to continue these efforts. I think they're going to continue to try to strike at capabilities for the Houthis in Yemen, as well as pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria. If they can identify Iranian Revolutionary Guard facilities, particularly again in Iraq and Syria, they may strike at those. But again, I think that the president has been very clear in saying that he does not want to see this escalate into a full-blown regional conflict, and that is still going to limit the options that he has in front of him.
Now, the Houthis have insisted that they won't stop their attacks as long as this Israel-Hamas war continues in Gaza. So what next